I've said it before and I'll say it again, a franchise as large as Pokémon is bound to be referenced a fair few of times. But what's even more interesting is the times in which Pokémon was the one making the references. Throughout the past 26 years and over, I don't even know how many different mediums, there have been so many different little references, I'd have to make a victorious-length video essay about it. I don't have that kind of time though, and neither do you, so I'm gonna filter it down a little bit. In this video, we're gonna look at the best of the best pop culture references from the Pokémon anime. I'm a sucker for categorization too, so I'm gonna split these up into 3 different eras based on how silly the writers were feeling for any given season. First, we're gonna talk about the original series, then what I refer to as the middle era, and finally we'll discuss Sun and Moon. I've seen the stats, and I know y'all don't want me introducing this for too long, so let's hop right into the best references from the original Pokémon anime. I want to start off strong with one of my favorites and the original joke that got me to make this video. In the original Pokémon movie, when everyone begins to make their journey to Mewtwo's island, Jessie, James, and Meowth disguise themselves as Vikings, and offer to give our main characters a ride on their longship. In the original Japanese, on the way to the island, Brock has a throwaway line complimenting the boat. In English, however, Brock proclaims that he didn't think there were any Vikings. Ash then responds that they still exist, they just mostly live in Minnesota. This is a reference, of course, to the American NFL team, the Minnesota Vikings. On paper, this is not particularly funny, but the more I ponder on it, it really starts to get to me. There's a lot of disconnect between the wonder and awe created around the Pokemon world and, mild-mannered, real-world Minnesota. But if that wasn't enough, this one line also spawned a couple more jokes. Pokemon is translated into a lot of languages, most of which are not interested in the state of American football. So, in the Danish dub, Ash responded with
Jo, men de turnerer mest i Sverige.
Which means they do exist, they just mostly tour in Sweden. This line, shared in the Norwegian dub, is a reference to the Swedish dance band, the Vikings. Listening to just a snippet of their songs has taught me that this is 10 times funnier than anything the Minnesota Vikings could ever provide. Last for this one, I promise, is that the reference to the Vikings band wasn't even in the Swedish dub. They just referenced the fact that real Vikings lived in Norway, which is almost funnier just because it isn't a joke, it's just true. Continuing off of movies, there were some actual references in the show to existing movies. Indiana Jones managed to make its way into Pokémon on multiple occasions. The only time in the original series, though, is Gary's not-so-subtle cosplay in the episode Attack of the Prehistoric Pokémon. Also, his eyelid is miscolored here, what a loser. Speaking of not so subtle though, there's a pretty notable reference in one of the more controversial episodes of the series. I'm talking about the episode Tentacool and Tentacruel, which its depictions of flooding and the destroying of skyscrapers had it banned from airing both after 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. We are interested though in the reference to the 1996 film Independence Day, where the giant tentacled invader captures and uses someone who can speak as their mouthpiece to share a plan of destruction. In the movie, it was a scientist, and in the show, it was Meowth, so about as far away from a scientist as possible. But the similarity is there, especially considering this episode came out only a year after the movie. Last for movies, we have a somewhat more meta reference. In the episode Lights, Camera, Quaction, Brock introduces the famous movie director Cleven Spielbank. Any high-level film students in the audience could tell this is a cheeky reference to the movie director Steven Spielberg, who did some of the most famous movies ever: Jaws, Jurassic Park, E.T., and Ready Player One. Spielbank, though, is famous for one movie in particular, I Know What You Ate Last Tuesday, a reference to the genuinely pretty intense slasher film I Know What You Did Last Summer. Not only is this a funny choice for a children's anime, but also it wasn't even directed by Steven Spielberg, adding a level for sure. Episode 138, The Superhero Secret, was the anime's opportunity to make as many superhero references as possible. First off is the main character Gligar Man, who is a pretty evident Batman wannabe. He isn't Bruce Wayne though, instead he's Mr. Parker, another reference, this time to Peter Parker or Spider-Man. Going 3 for 3 though, they reference Superman 2, as when the video of Gligar Man is shown, we are given the wonderful line,
Look, up in the sky, is it a Pidgeotto? A Charizard? A Dragonite? No, it's the crime-fighting Pokemon superhero, Gligar Man!
Last for the original series, we have just some random English dub titles that I particularly enjoyed. Episode 209 is Machoke Machoke Man, a reference to the song Macho Man by the Village People. Episode 18 and 169 are references to Beauty and the Beast, being Beauty and the Beach and Beauty and the Breeder respectively. I guess they felt like they could use that name again, considering Beauty and the Beach was that episode, and was only aired twice in the United States before we were told to forget it ever happened. Finally, I saved the most clever of all, episode 100, Wherefore Art Thou, Pokémon? This is of course based on the line from Romeo and Juliet and has two Nidoran named Tony and Maria, which are references to West Side Story, which is also based on Romeo and Juliet. And hey, wait, there was a movie adaptation done by Steven Spielberg. We've come full circle, so let's move on to the next era of episodes. First, we have the only reference I have here from the Ruby and Sapphire era, and disappointingly enough, it's just another Indiana Jones reference. This time being the famous boulder chase scene referenced in Battling the Enemy Within, which also isn't unique to the Gen 3 anime, as Black and White would also reference this in the episode Explorers of the Hero's Ruin. For Diamond and Pearl, the first big reference we have is in the episode You See We Want an Evolution. In this episode, Meowth is responsible for operating an evolution machine that has a remote that looks a lot like a Wii remote, and in case you didn't notice, he makes sure to remind us. Wii. Later in the episode Uncrushing Defeat, Ash and his team are planning to use their ultimate attack on Team Rocket, and we're given a sequence akin to Super Sentai, or, Power Rangers, showing a close-up of each Pokemon announcing their name before an awesome group shot. Another reference to Japanese television, the episode Staging a Hero's Welcome has two girls wearing hats that resemble Wallace's. What's special though is what's under the hats, being two characters who look like Sakura and Tomio from the show Card Captor Sakura. They probably chose to reference these two characters here, as the Wallace hat greatly resembles the hat that those characters wear in their own show. Episode 16's English dub is titled A Gruff Act to Follow, which is actually a reference to the fact that you should follow me on all my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and of course here on YouTube. If you're enjoying the video or any other videos I've done, this is the best way to let me know. Finally, for Diamond and Pearl, I want to include 3 of my actual favorite dubbed episode titles. First is the episode following Ash's nightmare based around becoming a Pokemon Master, titled Malice in Wonderland, an obvious reference to Alice in Wonderland, another story where the main character traverses a land they don't understand. Next is Ill Will Hunting, named after the very unrelated to anything in the episode movie, Good Will Hunting from 1997. Finally is my favorite title from this section, episode 52, Smells Like Team Spirit, a reference to the 1991 song Smells Like Teen. So let's just move on to the Black and White anime. First off is our movie references. In the concisely titled episode Movie Time, Zorua and the Legend of the Pokemon Knight, Silent mentions Yamask of the Opera, which is a blatant reference to the Phantom of the Opera, which is a novel, movie, and musical in real life. This might be the first time that the episode title is longer than the entire explanation itself. This isn't even the only time Zorua is used when it comes to making movie references, as in episode 82, not only are the movies they're watching references to Dirty Harry and Godzilla, but we see the MGM logo featuring Zorua instead of Leo the Lion. This same gag was used 2 times in X and Y, once with Meowth and once with Pikachu, but I guess when you've had almost 900 episodes of the show at that point, you're bound to have some overlap. In episode 58, A Call for Brotherly Love, Chili and his Pansear go on a training montage to get out of their losing streak. This entire montage is an homage to the 1976 film Rocky, even having Pansear make his way up the stairs before throwing his hands in the air to celebrate his accomplishments. Interestingly enough, the stairs that Rocky runs up in the movie are in Philadelphia, which is titled, similarly to the episode, The City of Brotherly Love. There weren't near as many fun referential titles in this series, so I'm going to end this section by talking about A Restoration Confrontation Part 2. In this episode, Team Rocket attempts to steal Ash and friend's Tortuga, before a dripped-out Jessie tells them that resistance is futile. This line and the aforementioned eyepiece are both references to the character Borg from Star Trek The Next Generation. Alright, that's not the coolest reference ever, but with titles like Movie Time, Zora, and the whatever it was, it's hard for me to sparse out any particularly good titles. Let's just have y'all yell at me at forgetting your favorite in the comments and move on to the final section, Pokemon Sun and Moon. First for Sun and Moon is a look at the many times this part of the anime decided to reference Mobile Suit Gundam. Within episode 42, Alola Kanto, Team Rocket brings out a giant robotic Meowth. The idea of having a big mobile suit alone isn't the reference, but instead it's the way that Meowth operates it. He has these little devices around his head and wrists that allow him to control the robot as if it were his own body. This greatly resembles the Mobile Trace system from Mobile Fighter G Gundam. This Meowth Gundam comes back 60 episodes later in Alola Alola. This time it dons a beautiful red and yellow color scheme, which I assume is a reference to the original Mobile Suit Gundam's main villain, Char Aznable. Everything he has around him dons a red and yellow color scheme, including his Gundam, a stronger and alternatively colored version of the Zaku model you see earlier in the show. This is mimicked perfectly by the now stronger red and yellow Meowth, coming after the normal colored weaker one. Last Mobile Suit Gundam reference for now, in episode 64, there is a game of what looks like football between two tribes of Pasmisians. When the underdog looks like he's about to lose, he brings out a familiar maneuver. He jumps off the back of one of the opponents for the sake of breaching an unbreakable defense. This move was used by the main character of Mobile Suit Gundam, Amuro, who did a similar jump to defeat a similarly unwinnable matchup. On paper, jumping off someone's back isn't enough to be a reference, but just look at the posing here. This is not only the exact same jump, but the victim's face is exactly the same as the one in Gundam. Also, if you want to see this episode for yourself, check out the Japanese subs, because this is yet another episode that wasn't well received in the West. Don't ask me why. Episode 66, Smashing with Sketch, is a ping pong episode. In this, it would make sense to reference the manga Ping Pong, with the character Ikari, who looks and acts like the character Ruichi Kazama. When Kyawe mentions Ikari, he does this pose, which may seem familiar as it's a reference to the famous pose done by Gendo Ikari from the show Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I could have sworn they referenced in the show other times, but I can't really remember when. In episode 93, Lilier and the Staff, when introducing the Poké problem for the episode, we are given this image, which is a clear reference to the poster for the original Star Wars movie. The episode itself is all about acting, and so we see references to a ton of media, including Glass Mask, Revolutionary Girl Utana, Tetsujin 28 Go, and every role of the Japanese voice actress for Jessie. Following up with more Team Rocket hijinks, James references the show Dragon Ball Z, while Jessie references Yu-Gi-Oh! At the exact same time in episode 89, The Prism Between Light and Darkness. Jessie shares her dastardly plan in a zoom-in and angle resembling this chaotic shot from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. James loves the idea so much he decides to begin transforming into a Super Saiyan. It actually looks a little more like the pseudo Super Saiyan form, but that's just semantics that I may or may not be discussing in a future video. Jessie, only a few episodes earlier, would be scolding her teammates before making this face, which is somewhat creepy, isn't it? This is the face of what is known as a Kewpie doll. Kewpie, or Kewpies, were characters from a 1909 comic done by Rose O'Neil that would be made into an insanely popular series of dolls only 3 years later. There's a lot of different versions of these funny little dudes, but most commonly they can be seen with this almost eerie expression, which makes sense for Jessie to use to frighten her compatriots. Last is another 2-in-1, 2 references in 1 episode. 2 references to what, you may ask? Well, Mobile Fighter G Gundam, of course. There's no way you thought there wouldn't be more. In this episode, Heart of Fire, Heart of Stone, Brock and Olivia use the Z move, Continental Crush, and have a very cool pose sequence. This pose is a reference to the move, and bear with me, Erupting Burning Finger Sekya Love Love Tenyoken from the aforementioned anime. Team Rocket also bring out another mech, this time a reference to the Dark Gundam, or Devil Gundam. This is one of the coolest Gundam models, and certainly the coolest mech that we'll see from Team Rocket in this video, as partial as I may be to Char. You may not believe it, but that's all I have for you here. Of course, this was not a completely comprehensive list, and there's a lot more out there to be discussed. If you want to see me do that, be sure to show it by liking and commenting. If you need something to comment, tell me your favorite reference from the series, and if we get enough, I can do a video of just y'all's fan favorites. Until that day comes, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It's free, so you'll always get your money's worth.